Hello, everybody. I'm glad you managed to make your way in this very, very cold weather. I was very tempted to stay in my bed and enjoy the warmth rather than come here. Um, I'm very excited about our event today because this is the second of our discussion around some of the papers, briefing papers, that different scholars have written. One of the things we're doing in MCC Brussels is trying to create an intellectual environment that is genuinely scholarly, that attempts to raise the discussion, the level of discussion, so that we're not just simply sloganeering and just kind of yelling at each other, but actually digging deep into issues and trying to make sense of them. And we thought that this particular topic is really, really quite important because one of the problems that confronts us, whether you're Hungarian or Belgian or England, where I live most of the time, is that society is being gradually detached from its past. The distance between the present and the past is just, getting longer and longer and longer. And our education system is devoted to altering the way that history is being taught and engaged with. And we here believe that having a more reflective discussion on the teaching of history can be a way of getting people from different sides, different political affiliations, and different religious and other kind of inclinations to come together and consider ultimately what is Europe's past, what is it that binds us together, what are the values that we want to take seriously, what are the values that we think are existentially important, particularly for the young, because when we're talking about teaching, we're talking about the future generations. What are we going to give them so that they can make their way in the world and ultimately build a better society? So we have Joanne Williams here coming over from England. She's an old colleague of mine. We used to argue a lot together. We used to argue against other people together. We have a track record of being involved in a lot of the debates that are going on in British society. And I think she's really well suited, given her background in pedagogy and teaching, to look into this issue of the European Union, history, how it's being taught, and what are the problems that she's discovered in the course of her research. So what we'll do is Joanna will talk to introduce her paper, and then afterwards we'll have Werner Patzelt, Professor Werner Patzelt from Germany, giving a German perspective on this particular issue, how he sees it from the experience of German society. And then we have Thibaut Gibelin, who is an MCC fellow in Budapest, but is also an essayist and quite a respectable and well-known and important intellectual. Hopefully, in the not-too-distant future, Europe will talk about him and his contribution. He will talk about the French sort of perspective, how French society sort of experiences some of these problems, and then we'll open up to discussion. I'm a big believer in argument and debate, and I have no, if you want to disagree or criticize and feel that what anybody says here needs to be challenged, feel free. It's, after all, the foundation on which a truly democratic society is built, the ability that we as grown-up people can argue with each other respectfully and take each other's ideas seriously. All right, Joan, take it away.
Thank you. I use this. So I've written a report on the politicisation of history teaching, and it looks at schools and practice and curricula in Belgium, Germany and the Netherlands. But without wanting to undercut the premise of my own report, I want to just kick off by saying that I think it's important that we do keep in mind that schools are only a part of society, and formal history lessons are just one way that children imbibe knowledge and attitudes and kind of messages, if you like, about the past. And they are also picking up what we as adults think about the past through the broader culture. So just to pick a few issues that have been in the news in the UK, really just in the past couple of days even, we've had the renaming of a school. Francis Drake Primary School in London is now called the Twin Oaks School, to completely distance itself from as the BBC described it, the slave trader Francis Drake. And you kind of think that at no point in the previous 400 years of history would Francis Drake have been referred to as the slave trader Francis Drake. Children are also aware that statues and street names in the area in which they live are being either torn down or contextualized to have plaques inserted next to them to kind of point out what's bad about the figure who's memorialized in the statue. And museums, which schools might once upon a time have taken children to on trips and visits out, are also having entire exhibitions either removed from display or, again, contextualized with so many words so that children can be under no doubt at all that everything to do with the past is bad and a cause of suspicion. I think for me, the big problem is that we've got this cultural context, this kind of broader cultural context, and schools and history teachers are not only doing nothing to challenge this broader cultural context, that urging children to think of the past in that way. And one of the things I really highlight in my report is the terrible role I think that the Council of Europe has played in leading the charge in this regard. The Council of Europe has had an interest in history teaching for over 7 decades now. It was 1952 when the Council of Europe first met to discuss history teaching across the continent. And at that point, it was very concerned to root out bias and prejudice in history teaching. It was concerned to look at textbooks. It assessed 900 of the 2,000 history textbooks that were being used in schools at that time. And, you know, I guess in some ways it wasn't all bad at that point. What the Council of Europe was trying to do was to promote objectivity, to promote, it said, democracy, to combat misinformation. But I guess what's significant is that it established itself as being a source of authority, even at that point, as being a source of influence, as being a source that teachers and schools should look to as a direction in what should be said. So I guess even at that point, it was superseding the role of the nation state and the intellectual autonomy of teachers themselves in determining what it is that children should know about the past. But over the course of 70 years, what's become more important and driving the Council of Europe seems to be less about rooting out, kind of promoting objectivity, rooting out bias and prejudice as they saw it, but in many regards promoting their own values, imposing their own set of values upon history teaching. And these are values which very much seem to be about challenging the importance of the nation state at a fundamental level, either at first through arguing that children should learn the history of other countries, which are kind of hard to disagree with, clearly interesting to know the history of other countries too, but whether that should supersede and take precedence over learning the history of your own country, I guess is something worth discussing. But also the idea of learning the history of one nation in relation to other countries becomes an interesting point when that again becomes a relentlessly negative drive to learn the role that your country played, and that's only seen as being in relation to the slave trade, for example, or in relation to colonialism. So your own nation is essentially seen as the baddie in relation to other countries. You learn the sins that your nation inflicted upon others. It also, it seems to be driving forward, as opposed to a view of national history, what I would describe as a very identitarian view of history, focused upon the experiences of identity groups, as opposed to the more potentially unifying concept of the nation state. So the best example I found of this was a 2018 report, an anthology which has been very much funded by the Council of Europe, and it's called Queer in Europe During the Second World War. And it's about the experiences of the LGBTQ plus community during the Second World War. Now, I think what's interesting, again, that, you know, absolutely nothing against people knowing about this. It's clearly an interesting element of history. It's very interesting in its own terms report, and I would recommend people have a read of it. But I think for me what's interesting is the fact that this has been the only report the Council of Europe has published on the Second World War in the past couple of decades, and that this is the issue that they choose to highlight. So if this is what's driving the curriculum, if this is what's shaping and helping teachers select what to teach, then the message children are getting about the Second World War is nothing to do with battles or military strategy, is nothing to do with international conflict and geopolitical tensions. It is nothing even to do with the war on the home front, if you like, and I guess from a UK perspective, we talk about the Blitz and the kind of bombing of London. You know, what they're getting instead is this very identity-driven focus on the experience of one very, very small community, which is then read in a cross-border way. So it's not focused on even the experiences within one country, but the community across nation states. It's a focus on private life rather than public events. And it, as far as I'm concerned, you know, apologies if this is read as offensive, but it's much more about promoting a kind of fashionable cause. It's about promoting what's considered in the present day to be an oppressed group, a group that needs to have more attention, more of a light shone upon it, rather than actually looking at, well, what was it that was happening during the Second World War? Let's start from history, let's start from the past. What was important about what was going on at that time that we think children need to know today? It's about starting with the present day and thinking, what are the concerns that titillate us and kind of make us interested today, and how can we read these present day concerns back into the past to construct a curriculum. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes thinking about how this now plays out in practice, and I guess this is the focus of the report that I've written. I mean, obviously children are not just kind of corralled into classrooms and told, you know, the past was all bad. I think things are a bit more subtle than that, and I think that's what comes out of actually looking at the curriculum of the particular countries I'm focusing upon. But you can very clearly, I think, identify some common trends. I mean, and just to pick out kind of 5 common trends that I identified. One is there's very much a focus on skills rather than knowledge. So rather than actually teachers identifying bodies of knowledge that they think it's important, facts, information, even if it's presented as being potentially contested, rather than the starting point being what do we think children need to know about what happened in the past, the focus is instead on developing skills. What's interesting in that, I think, is that the key skill seems to be empathy. I mean, I have to say, empathy is not even something that I would have ever really considered to be a skill. If I'm being empathetic, you know, I think that's me kind of demonstrating my humanity, or just being a nice person, or being human, having feelings and emotions. The idea that you can be taught to experience the skill of empathy, I find a little baffling. But again, it relates to a sense of history as being about victimized identity groups, and that you should feel a certain way, that there's a certain response that it's appropriate to have when thinking about particular groups. And empathy, the idea that you teach empathy as a skill really suggests to me that it's not so much that there are right things and wrong things to know, but there are right ways and wrong ways to feel about the past, and by promoting empathy through the history curriculum, it's really about telling children that there are correct ways that they should feel about the past. So that's the first trend. The second trend I identified is that there's really a morphing of history into civics, citizenship, and a kind of broader sense of humanities in a way that seems to get very little commented upon nowadays. Around 1990, there seemed to be a debate taking place about when history should start and stop on the curriculum, not so much when it should start, but when history should stop. And the idea that you would teach things that went beyond 1960 was frowned upon a little bit, or certainly questioned, that you were getting into more the terrain of politics or civics rather than history. And history was seen rather crudely as things that happened 30 years previously and before. That seems to have completely gone out of the window now, and really anything that happened yesterday, it seems, can now be classed as good substance for a history class. And again, I think what really strikes me about this as being important is it is this idea of the starting point is today. You know, the starting point of history teaching is not the past, is not what happened 100, 200 years ago, or even 10 years ago. The starting point is now, today, and it's today that history is preoccupied with. What are our main concerns today? What is it that children need to know about today? And then a kind of cherry picking backwards of the past to meet the concerns of today, rather than any inherent focus on the past as being something important in and of itself. The third point I'd make then is that where this leads to, it seems to me, is this very, and I would get this from all the countries that I looked at and my own experiences of history teaching in the UK, is this very kind of odd pick and mix style curriculum. So as she's not here, I'll use my own daughter as an example. So my daughter's 16, she's doing A-level history at school. So this is the kind of final exam that you would do before going on to study history, potentially at university. She's somebody who's always been very interested and done history throughout school. But so this is her A-level history, the advanced level. And the topics she's doing for her A-level history are the Cold War in Asia, Tudor England, and civil rights in America. Now, I have no problem with any of those topics. I think they're all fascinating. They're all very, very interesting. But what becomes very, very quickly apparent when you talk to my daughter is she's interested in the Cold War in Asia, Tudor England, and civil rights in America. But she has absolutely no idea of overall chronology, of kind of which one of these might have, I mean, I guess I'm doing her down. She's got some vague sense that the Tudors was the first bit that happened. But there's no overall sense of why these topics have been chosen, how they relate to English history, why English history might be important for somebody who is English, you know, and even the connection between, I guess, the Cold War in Asia and civil rights in America. There's no capacity, there's no connections made between them. It's as if these random topics have been written on slips of paper, dropped into a hat, and three have been picked just complete random, as here's three interesting different things we can talk about. I think actually having some sense of the nation, having some sense of chronology, driving history forward, connecting up different topics would be a really important thing to work towards. The fourth one I've already touched upon, so I won't dwell upon, is the emphasis on identity groups rather than the nation. The fifth one, I would say, is the emphasis on past sins rather than past acts of heroism. So I touched upon this with the renaming of Francis Drake Primary School. You know, it's when the past is touched upon, because of the imperative driving forward history of being the concerns with the present. And obviously in the present, we're preoccupied with talking about racism, with a fear of national sovereignty, with a worry about white supremacy, even in the UK. The instinct to cherry pick history then for the bad things that happened, to dwell on the sins of the past. Again, you know, I stress obviously I have nothing against children knowing about slavery, knowing about colonialism, knowing about the legacy of empire. I think those are very, very important things for children to know about. But in the context of a balanced curriculum, with the context of a curriculum that gave them an overarching sense of chronology, that gave them a starting point being the history of the nation state, they would be able to put those sins, in inverted commas, into some broader context that allowed them to situate them alongside some of the good things that Britain, Germany, Holland, whatever country you want to talk about, might have also been responsible for as well. So just to very, very quickly conclude here, I think that my main concern really is what children are actually not getting from history at the moment. So what I see that children are not getting, that they should be getting, is a national story, some sense of chronology, some at least aim towards objectivity, some sense that objectivity might be something that even if it's difficult, might be worth striving for to some extent. A sense of continuity between past and present that could really give them a connection with previous generations and a sense of belonging. And I think, again, this is why I would stress the importance of the nation rather than identity groups, because to me, the nation's the one thing that can transcend different identity groups and actually give all children, whatever their biological identity, a sense of belonging to a community that is bigger than themselves.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jo. I think her point about the rupture of continuity is really, really important that we should think about, because if you rupture continuity, then basically you're left in purgatory, in a sense. You're left in a place that you don't know where you came from and you don't know where you're going, and that's something we should remember in this discussion. Werner, please.
Well, first of all, I fully agree with what Joanne has said, so I could stop here, but this would not be the proper role. And as a German, I'm supposed to be quite systematic. Therefore, I prepared 3 remarks on the general uses of the research on and the teaching of history, and 2 remarks on some specific German approaches to history, which might be interesting and even important, even beyond Germany. So there are basically 3 uses that can be made of teaching and learning history. The first one is you learn about the history of your nation, like all pupils of a given generation, just attending school, and so you acquire a common understanding of who you are in terms of culture and common historical experiences. And this generates something like bonding capital and is helpful for social cohesion within a nation. This is one of the important points in Joanne's paper. And of course, such a bonding capital and sense of togetherness, belonging together, brings benefits for the identity and the integration of a people, and thus helps to establish and to run pluralistic democracy. The reason is that common knowledge about common history and its legacies is something like a common denominator that you need in all these conflicts and contests and discussions in which pluralistic democracy unfolds. So generating such resources for democracy, for practice pluralism in its of democracy, in the only well-tested framework of democracy, I should add, and this is the nation state. We don't have any idea how we could organize real democracy on the European level or on worldwide level. We know how to organize well-functioning democracy within a nation state and create the social capital which is necessary to run such a complicated form of government like a democracy is really important. This is one of the uses of history, and this is one of the main arguments in your paper. As soon as this paper is published, read it. It's really illuminating and gives ample evidence on the varieties of well-taken or not so well-taken history teaching. So what's the second use of studying history and teaching history? Well, if you deal with history, you learn about patterns. You learn about patterns in social processes, economic and political processes, as they unfold and become apparent in history. To put it metaphorically, you can try to figure out the grammar of how social reality is constructed and changes over time is destroyed or enriched. Of course, you must make sure that you do not invent patterns, that you do not superimpose a narrative for ideological reasons, because then you do not get patterns in history or the grammar of history, but you only get the echo of your own narratives, as it was done in all these historicist speculations of scientific communism, with the history taking a necessary course from the original society, from primitive society, to the wonderful world of communism, where the state comes to an end and all kind of alienation of humans from other humans is abolished. No, not that, not that. Research must be aimed at seeing real order in history, that is order which is not conceptually superimposed by well-formulated narratives. If this happens, if this is done, and it can be done, it's not my topic today, but I could give you an endless lecture on how to detect patterns in history. If this is done, then you really learn how to read history, how to infer lessons for the future from what has been repeatedly observed in the past. Of course, this kind of dealing with history has its proper place at universities and not at grammar schools or even elementary schools. But the results of such an intellectual endeavor can be taught and can be illustrated by examples. The third use of history, the one to which history teaching has evolved during the last decades, is the following one. You have ideas about what is politically good or politically bad. Everybody among us has. And you want to convince others that you are right and that the others should follow you and your convictions and behave as you suggest them to behave properly. For this purpose, it is, as everybody knows, usually helpful to refer to examples from history and to demonstrate, based on these examples, what should be done at present times and what should be avoided. History, then, is used as a quarry of pedagogically useful examples on which teachers and politicians can base and will base and are basing the arguments. Of course, the challenge is to really know what is good or to know what is really good or really bad, because otherwise, well, there is no justification for making this type of use of history, in particular in front of children, for whom even pure nonsense has chances to pass as meaningful and reasonable. And one of the criticisms in Joanne's paper is that many things that for many people seem to be, well, not so reasonable, are taken for granted. It's good to behave in this way, and we learn from history how you now in the present times ought to behave yourself. The downside of this endeavor is, of course, that such piecemeal history will neither give more than a superficial feeling, at best, for chronological order. And if you don't have a feeling for chronological order in history, you don't have reduced chances, to put it mildly, to detect that interplay of contingency and path dependency out of which patterns in history unfold. So you won't have any chance to detect the grammar of history and to understand the language, to put it a bit too metaphorically, spoken by historical events and how they are related to each other. Having said all of that, I would like to add two remarks from a German perspective. Two remarks which might help to understand some even deeper layers of what Joanna has so profoundly discussed. Joanna has shown the contradiction between using history to create national identity and to generate European identity. Maybe you understand the size and the unsolvability of this problem better after understanding that, and now I'm overstating my point a little, that there is not even a German history before the times of the mid-19th century. since there was no Germany with a coherent and common history, but there were only the German states with their own histories, like the histories of Prussia, of Austria, of Saxony, Bavaria, whatever other part of Germany you will refer to. German history proper began only after the creation of Imperial Germany in 1871. If we put apart the history of the emperor's conflicts with the estates of the empire, but this is not German history. This is the history of the system of government of the Holy Roman Empire, which got the addendum of Germanation only in 1648. Even for the period between 1945 and 1989, there is no one German history. There are the distinct histories of the two German states. And there is the forgotten history of the lost parts of former Germany. So, why should we assume that it would be less difficult to outline and to teach a European history if most relevant changes have occurred and still occur in the histories of the European nation states, and therefore are rightfully taught with a national focus in the single European states? Of course, there is one pseudo solution to this problem, realized in one of the Brussels museums, and this pseudo solution is to equate European history with the history of the European Union. Just like most Germans tend to equate German history with the history of United Germany. The better solution of this problem would be the problem of where to find resources for European cohesion. The better solution is to turn to culture and to look at how culture unfolds or develops over history. European history then would be the history of European culture, beginning in antiquity, encompassing Christianity, looking at how the Occident proper has been formed in confrontation of this western peninsula of Eurasia with the Mongolians and the Normans, with the Hungarians and with the Ottomans, and how both the hierarchical society of distinct estates and the development of modern science gave shape to Europe, and so on and so forth. This is really what gives cohesion to Europe in all the different languages in which the European people still speak today, with all the different path-dependent processes of structure building, of identity building. There is one common European culture, and it can be described as it unfolds over time. Looking at culture, yeah, I can. I come to the end. Is exactly how Germans before the mid-19th century thought about who they were and what they kept them together. Second brief remark, the Holocaust. The Holocaust, along with having been beaten twice in grand wars within roughly 30 years, is certainly a key issue of the teaching of history at German schools. Among the consequences is widespread knowledge about German wars and German crimes, and dissatisfaction with being a German. And one other consequence is the custom of defining what needs to be done against the background of what has been done in history. So a part of German history has been treated and still is treated as the most significant part of this history, and then is put into the service of personal and political education. It's no bad thing to put history into the service of education. Nothing at all is wrong with that. Yet, after some decades and even several generations of pupils, much of that has become ritualistic and a pure recital of well-tested formulas. Today, common history does integrate Germany only as far as most well-educated Germans try to distance themselves from German history. And it seems that this is not really that this not really commendable German model, without calling it so, is emulated in what gives shape to historical education following the advices and the suggestions and the desires of the European Council. The accent is put on what was or today is seen as wrong, like being a white culture spreading over most of the world with all the consequences. And it may safely be predicted that those thematic innovations, which you covered in your paper so wonderfully, that these thematic innovations in teaching history will neither strengthen cohesion in Europe nor create proud Europeans. But if we want to maintain this wonderful achievement that the European Union is, we need European citizens who are proud to be European citizens. And this is why European historical education is really of utmost importance.
Right. Well, next time we'll give Werner his own lecture that he can give, where he can develop these ideas. If you could keep to your time, that'd be really useful, because I would like to bring people in from the audience.
Thank you very much. So the question for us is how French situation original is, and which risk or opportunity could we wait from such an important country in Europe. At first sight, French history is so long and rich that we would think we cannot vanish such a history. We have our first king crowned just 20 years after the dismissal of the last Roman Empire in Rome. And such great achievement through Middle Age and modern era show that the state, the French state, even was the pattern for the other nation state in Europe. But precisely here, there is the core of the problem. We speak in France about the national novel, saying that the history is a kind of novel, and here it sounds a bit artificial. And indeed, we had in our French history several resets of our history. It occurred twice already, and we are confronting now a third reset of our national history. The first one is when the French Revolution pretended to vanish French history and reinvent a people. And they succeed. So it's important to consider how strong there is a possibility that today nations in Europe could be destroyed and replaced by another narrative, like the EU narrative. Because we had 13 centuries of monarchy. We had this cultural hegemony of France in the 18th century, and one of the most important power in the world that was considered, after all, as a time of darkness and oppression. And this is the old-fashioned republic, let's say, that replaced the republic. I say old-fashioned because after the Second World War, we had a new brand of republic. The winner of the war in France was the General de Gaulle and the communists. And they shared the power because de Gaulle was not strong enough to resist against the Anglo-Saxon pressure, and the Communist Party was so important that he gave the educational system, among other institutions of the country, to the communists. And the communists considered that the former republic was just a wrong revolution that helped the bourgeoisie rather than the workers. And quite directly after the Second World War, we had the decolonization war, and the Communist Party and most of the French people that trusted this Communist Party considered French history, even under the Republic, as a time of oppression against the people, the oppressed colonial country. So in fact, today we are confronted to a collapse of national education in France. It's very difficult to teach the basics of how to learn and count, but we have this feeling and this ideology that even this recent France, after the Second World War, was not perfect. It could be better. And so we had 50 years after the end of the Second World War, the recognition that the French state was guilty for what happened during the occupation. De Gaulle refused such a narrative, say that the French state was in London and that the continuity of the French nation was defended by the resistance, and everyone supposedly stand by the resistance. And a big achievement of the post-war situation was the social welfare established by the National Council of Resistance. And a lot of communists, of course, were part of this committee. And this social this provident state was dismantled by the socialists in the past years. Today, when we teach French history to young people, we present that there is a new France. So, of course, before the French Revolution, it was complete darkness. Before the Second World War, it was a very imperfect republic. We had terrible responsibility in Algerian War and in this too outdated and old-fashioned French society in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and now we come out of the shadow. We discover the light, the reason, and the real civilization. In the report, extremely interesting, you wrote, you speak about the new Europe that they defend. And we have the new France as well. And we face the same incoherence about this vision of history. First, because we should be at the end of history. And precisely at that time, they defend a new Europe, a new France that is a permanent change. And the second paradox is that we defend with this new branding the youth as a real myth. And we are the oldest French society ever. And all over Europe, we are the oldest European society because there is less and less birth, and we have a huge amount of our population that is really very old. So it's just a way to say to the youth, you have to accept this change because this is the new fashion. Now, the new fashion about teaching history, I think, is really related to nationalism. There is a complete confusion about what nationalism is. There is nations in Europe from the Middle Age, and France is a good example of a very old nation. When we talk about modern nationalism, it's only the second half of the 19th century. This is the springs of the people and the creation of this united Germany, for instance, and all of these European nations that brutally destroyed each other during the two World War conflict. And we denounce nations as and we want to dismantle this old and precious identity because of the access of this modern system. Like when we denounce nationalism according to the political correctness, it's because of it's an excess of rootedness and traditional legacy. But to my mind, it's the opposite. What is the problem with nationalism is the contractualism, the fact that because of the industrial revolution and the brutal change of society, we need a new kind of collective identity. And in the 19th century, that was the modern nation state. This new state has every European country, and now all over the world, you have your flag with very basic colors, and this flag cover and hide the reality of the country and the society more than it unveil the final all the riches of this nation. We have this the similarity in all this country that the state is the real actor, the real player of this nation building. And today it is the European institutions and the Council of Europe that, and in the same, in two cases, we have this, this is the coldest of the cold monsters that Nietzsche denounced with the modern state, even back to the 19th century. So we have this artificial state nation building that does not represent the national identity, but rather the industrial process of making collective identity. We are confronted we are confronted to the risk of abstraction, and we are more and more far from the real ground of who the people are, what they desire, what the traditional and the habit could mean. And this is something that goes with the Industrial Revolution. We cannot distinguish the evolution of history and history teaching and the evolution of our society as a huge industry. So for me, the very important trend, and I will finish on that remark, it's to defend rootedness and concrete identities. When we were disgusted by the excess of nationalism, it was time to build something at the upper level, the European identity. But what is more logical and more efficient would be to defend the local identity that provide a simple and fruitful reference for the average people. And because I know who I am as a local French, I will be French through this local identity. It's not because you are really close to your region in the Borchod or in Pécs, for instance, that you cannot be Hungarian. You're Hungarian precisely through this local commitment. I will finish on that paradox that we try to teach pupils the philosophy of history, something extremely complicated, the synthesis of a lot of critical research, and in the same time, we deny for our youth to discover their own body. And this is the problem with the transgender identity. That when a young girl or a boy suffer from becoming himself, herself, we say, oh, you suffer, you are ill at ease in your body, so just change your gender or just create more confusion. The first thing we should discover is our inner reality. And I mean, of course, that we are either a man or a woman. And if we continue this reflection on the political and historical level, means that first we need our local identity to be strong, and it will be even more logical to become a real French and a real European.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thibault. I think that there is two very important themes that come out for me in this discussion. One is the tendency to read history backwards, where we project onto the past the concerns of today, whatever those fashionable concerns are that Werner mentioned earlier on. I think we need to think about that. Just in relation to what you were saying, I'm doing work on transgender ideology, and there is now loads of books on transgender history where essentially there's an artificial attempt to create the impression that the issues of today that we're debating and discussing were of tremendous concern in 16th century Europe, which obviously is more than a myth. It's for a lack of a better academic word, it's called bullshit, basically. So there is first of all reading history backwards, but more importantly, I think what comes out of this that's crucially important is that the old idea of the good old days has been replaced by the bad old days, so that everything is bad. We got a year zero history where we draw a line, and everything that's gone on beforehand we kind of dismiss as, we use the word in my academic field, it's problematic. Right? There's nothing that you want to draw on. None of the resources that were talked about or that Joanne mentioned are there. Anyways, I'd like to open up the floor for discussion. Ask questions, raise criticisms, talk about your own experiences. Because what I'm really interested in is how you see the situation. And I know that at discussions in Brussels like this, there's very often, it's like a Soviet type of discussion where there is this deadly silence after somebody has spoken. I don't want any of that because I'm an old-fashioned academic. I will go up to you and ask you for your opinion. Thank you. Balázs, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Balázs Hidvégi, member of the European Parliament from Hungary. Thank you for the panel. Fascinating thoughts and talks. I've got two questions I'd like to ask to put to all of you. But before that, it seems to me, and perhaps it's like that because I am a member of the European Parliament and I'm sitting in the Libe committee, and maybe that characterizes my impressions of the world. But I see this today more and more as an era of absurdities that are presented and pushed down through our throats and into our children's minds, as we have heard, at an astonishing rate and with an astonishing aggressiveness. And so I wonder what has led to this. How have we ended up here? That's my first question to all of you. What's the cause, and so quickly? Is it this overpowering woke ideology, the cancel culture, all that, and the destruction of history teaching or historical thinking, and very often actually the sanctioning of thought. So the whole thing is very much against freedom of thought, freedom of expression. Is it because of individualism? Is it because of this is the final stages of men without religion or any respect for anything supernatural? Is it that that's causing it, or is it because Europe as a whole basically lost its ability to self-direct or to think freely after the Second World War, and we've become intellectually sort of followers of the latest American craziness? And is it that, or I don't know what has led here? First question. Second is, what explains the passivity of the intellectual elites in Europe, in your countries, in what you know best, in intellectual circles, in the academia, in the media, in international companies? That's the elite, the intellectual elite, the business elite. And they seem to, though, the large majority of them seem to sort of, just follow this without any criticism and utter these absurdities. What explains that? Is that fear? Is that the internet? What is it?
Yeah, they're two brilliant questions. I'm not going to get you to answer it just yet, because otherwise we'll finish the whole meeting by the time you're done. Anybody else would like to speak? Over there, yeah. Is there a microphone we can give?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I want to say thank you very much to our guests. My name is Tyke Pigeon, journalist with the European Conservative. Not here to interrogate, of course, but I've brought a question for Joanna, where you mentioned that you notice history as a subject is fragmenting into all these incredibly niche subjects, to the point where you're almost wondering what is the relevance of this subject, to the point where it almost seems that subjects are being made up. And to counterpose that, at the same time, we are finding that in academia, especially in the humanities, 80% of humanities papers which are published are not even cited, they're not even read. So, to make a general question, to what extent do you believe this fragmentation, creation of niche history is ideological? And to what degree do you imagine it might be even more cynical, more material? even in a certain Marxist sense, it seems like an academic class that is too large, trying to perpetuate itself and create itself through ideological justifications. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just take a couple of more and then Bruno.
I mean, I think one of the key moments, obviously, in a way, I suppose, is the whole idea of the end of history, which comes at a certain moment. And then, in a way, logically, automatically springing from that, is to look back at the history that has ended and to see it as the bad old days. You immediately start in that whole world of getting people to basically say the past is barbarism, the past is a Holocaust, the past is two world wars. And again, very quickly, once that becomes the dominant outlook and the dominant worldview, is any challenges to the existing order, that's often called the liberal order, then becomes cast back into history. So there is, in response to the end of history and the institutions it represents, the European Union, WTO, IMF, even those international institutions, there is a democratic backlash to that. Then history starts to be retranslated. The end of history, the bad old days looking back, tends to be recast in terms of those contemporary challenges. So that in the world of the end of history, the democratic moment, the democratic impulse in European politics becomes recast as the cause of fascism, the cause of Nazism, because that is the new concern of elites today who face a democratic challenge to their end of history institutions.
One more there, and I want some of the younger guys, the younger women to speak. The old people dominated this country.
First of all, I apologize for my age. My name is Paul.
We forgive you.
I'm a Belgian author. I wrote the first woke critical book in Belgium. Something that has struck me is why have the institutions that we have developed throughout our history, political parties, the church, in the UK you have the royal family, caved and collapsed so spectacularly to this new religion? Because I think a lot of people look to those institutions for leadership. I think we can safely say there's a majority who do not go along with these woke ideas. And when we look towards these institutions that have developed throughout history, they cave and collapse. As an example, I cite the coronation, a news message that I saw passing on Twitter. I don't know if it's true, of course, that the coronation would highlight the plight of the LGBTQ community and migrants, whereas I thought that this would be a fantastic opportunity to highlight British values and history. So time and again, you see, I have nothing against the LGBTQ community or whatever, or migrants for that matter, but I think this kind of event would be a fantastic opportunity to highlight our culture, our values. So that's one question. Second remark I have for what Ms. Joanna Williams said regarding this promotion of empathy is that we always see that this only applies asymmetrically. Like Professor Kaufman said, it's this notion of asymmetrical multiculturalism also applies to empathy. We are supposed to have empathy, but only towards very specific people and parts of history, and certainly not towards history as a whole. So,
I'll just take one of the young ones. You know, no, not you. That one. I'll take you after that. Go on.
Thank you so much, Benedek Surami from the MCC. My question would be that. I think the key for finding the correct way of teaching students is starting in the primary school. And my question would be that regarding that you said that now we have an identity crisis in Europe regarding the history as well. And how would you define Europe for a primary school student? Thank you so much.
Joanna, would you come back?
Yeah, thank you. I think an awful lot of those questions seem to me to be very linked. So I'm going to speak generally. But one of the questions that emerged is how has this happened so quickly, so spectacularly, as if there's been a kind of positive and then suddenly everything's gone downhill. I mean, the first thing I would say is that I just don't think that's true, unfortunately. I don't think there is anything sudden or anything spectacular about this. I think it's deeply rooted in history. I think there's a long history to the decline of everything that we're kind of talking about. You know, I talked about the Council of Europe writing the first documents on history teaching dating back from 1952. And I think you can really trace it back to that point, and if not, you know, obviously in the decades before, when this. I mean, I guess the question is, even if it was nothing specifically wrong or there to be critical about with that document, why was there perceived to be a need to write that? Why were people in Europe getting together at that point to express concern about the teaching of history, so much so that they set up this elaborate, I mean, it really was quite elaborate process of all these different conferences and papers, and why was that obsession taking root at that time? And that's 70 years ago, and I think where we are today is really a very slow process of on a continuum from that point, and if not from a couple of decades before even than that. And I think, to me, what's the important point to make is that there's nothing kind of, and kind of apologies to the students who are here because I made this point earlier as well. I don't think there's anything particularly spectacular about the negative approach to history, or about the identitarian approach to history, or about the approach that says everything about the past is bad. I don't think that's won out on the strength of its arguments. I think actually it's the opposite that's the case, and I think you actually answered your own question. I think it's the passivity of the elites. It's the lack of, again, dating back to 1952 and beyond, you know, the fact that there clearly wasn't a positive sense of history where teachers and nation states were able to say, oh, Council of Europe, you know, bugger off, leave us alone, we're fine, thank you very much, we don't need your interference in our history teaching, in our curriculum, you know, we know what we're doing, we want to be left to get on with it, thank you. Clearly, even at that point, there was a pervasive sense of insecurity, there was a sense of not really knowing what they were doing with teaching history, of concern that they were doing it wrongly, that they should be doing something different. So it's that passivity of the elites, as you put it, that's really kind of held the door open for the identitarian, the empathy, the past is all bad view of history to take root. And I think I was hearing you speak about that really reminded me again, I guess it's a point in my own report, but you really brought it home to me, how you know, it can seem when you look at what's going on in history teaching as if all of these things are, and I guess I promoted this view myself, kind of fairly random, fairly disparate, just a bit haphazard, and pick and mix was the phrase I used. But when you look at these reports from the Council of Europe where they talk about the new Europe, I think there is actually a bit more of a conscious sense of actually engineering a new kind of European identity, a new sense of citizenship, of wanting to bring something into existence, of spotting this passivity and having an awareness of themselves, of being able to replace this, perhaps the replacement of one elite with another elite. I mean, just to be clear, I mean, what the new Europe was an issue which was discussed at kind of 1990, which would tally with the time Bruno was talking about with the end of history. And this was a point where Europe itself was considered to be, if not under threat, then certainly changing very rapidly. The collapse of the Cold War meant new nations entering Europe. Migration meant new people coming from within. So there was perceived to be kind of challenges to a sense of national identity, of European identity, both coming from within nations and from new nations being added in. And you do get the sense that it was actually seen as an opportunity to engineer something new into existence in the vacuum that had been created at that time.
Well, in their documents, they talk about the project of denationalizing history. So they explicitly wanted to make history not national, but to be European or even global. I mean, that's an explicit aim. Werner, would you like to?
Yes, some remarks. sudden change, this is the first keyword. If in springtime the trees are blossoming suddenly, it's not a sudden blossoming of the flowers and the trees. It's a long process which started in wintertime. Only external circumstances bring new energy or bring something new to happen. This is the, so to speak, the brief introduction of what I want to argue a bit more. In Europe, after the Second World War, there is the feeling that now a new era really is in the making, is in the beginning. In this respect, the German model intoxicated, so to speak, the rest of Europe, because Germans really feel that in 1945 everything changed. You wouldn't find any Nazi after 1945, or everybody was in opposition to the regime and so on. Everything in German history which could be linked to Weimar times and Nazi period was wrong, needed to be eradicated from historical memory and so on. We are new. We, the Federal Republic of Germany, we create a new tradition. We get rid of any old traditions. There is no need to think back to the 19th, 18th, 16th century. We are something new. And the same feeling, for good reasons, was shared overall in Europe. Finally, an era of peace started with the European coal and steel community, with the emerging friendship between Germany and France. We just have celebrated one of the anniversaries of the friendship treaty. Then came the long period of economic prosperity. Then comes in the 60s, the Cultural Revolution. Modern music, modern feeling of life, modern forms of sexuality. So the feeling was the old world has really disappeared. We are now in a new world, in a better world. And we have to defend this better world against all claims that something might be wrong, might be exaggerated. So those guys who disagree with us, who are the avant-garde of this new wonderful time, this new wonderful period, we have to defend this achievement against these backward-looking reactionaries. And we have to make use of the new possibilities. Today it is possible to transform males into females, and to transform them back perhaps, at least in psychological terms. We need to make use of that. And of course, this is an attractive idea. Now you are free. And now, the second now, come back the spirits of the past. War, scarcity of resources, the unwanted and unintended consequences of intended changes, all of that is striking back. And therefore, the elites who have brought forward this change now feel in a defensive position, and the forms of defense are deplatforming, cancel culture, and all these things. So this, I guess, is a broader picture which we need to know. A short second remark, why are academics in the avant-garde of those who support these changes? Shouldn't academics be, in one way or the other, the guardians of past experiences? Shouldn't academics transport what we know from the past into present and future times? Well, here we have to look at the different circumstances of academic careers. Today, you have to, well, do marketing for yourself, publish or perish, and do not publish lengthy monographs, which take 2, 3, 4 years to complete. Write short articles. If you're writing short articles in well-referred journals, in well-prestigious journals, well, you need to get a feeling what is fashionable, what is intellectually fashionable. And so you get a positive feedback loop. Young academics appreciate and embrace and act as loudspeakers of new fashionable ideas. And this is the proof that these are really the new and relevant ideas. You are a backward-minded conservative, you need to change your mindset. So we have an ever-increasing a circle with ever-increasing speed in how reality and self-perception of academics are perceived by themselves. And so this feeling, we are in a new era, we need to exploit its possibilities, we need to defend our achievements against all critics and all criticisms, and this prolific and pushing forward attitude of academics work quite nicely together, and that's the world like it is right now.
Yeah. When we think about history as a science, we should consider that there is not the religious authority that used to be in Europe 3 centuries ago. I mean, when Bossuet, very important priest in France, Louis XIV, should teach history to the son of the king, it was very easy. He said, okay, French language come from Latin, Latin from Greek, Greek from Hebrew, and everything is in the Bible. The Enlightenment process started just after the time of Bossuet and the climax of Louis XIV. And from that time, we had a critical approach in history. It was precisely a sharp analysis of what was written in the Bible. It's not exact. Finally, we should have a distinguished science, what is history, and what provide the authority, and what is the eternal truth that will be religion. But we are more and more in the secular society. And now history, it's not only a science. It played the role that religion used to play before. When we explain to the youth that there is this history of the earth and the history of the evolution of the society, it's the only reference, it's the positive reference we offer for them. And today, this is not, we cannot understand this on our official system, such an aspect of history. History is only a skill. It's only a tool to critique and to dismantle the old myth. But we need first a reality, and we need first some certainty to build the common identity of our country. And today, this is why we have, I think it is why we have this confusion and this conflict when we teach history. Everything is about how to critique the legacy of the past. It's because we cannot recognize our history as something that is sure, that cannot be attacked, because it is a kind of holy authority. There is nothing sacred anymore. And because of that permanent critique, we have this walk, like psychological sickness, let's say. That it's the lack of religion is one of the cornerstone of the problem.
But you know, there are generations of scholars who criticized history without renouncing history altogether. So some of the best historians are Enlightenment historians who basically, you might not agree with them, but they took the past very, very seriously as a source of knowledge. Not everybody said, forget about the past. And I think there's a difference between different generations of historians, because our generation now would never have a positive vision of what has gone on beforehand. In the 1930s, you could be a communist historian and talk about Spartacus, how good that was. And you could talk about the importance of this and that and find within history some very positive lessons. Whereas today, those people don't exist. It's merely an inferior version of what we are. And I think something new has happened, which is that we introduced a new year zero element, where the principal impulse is to rupture any kind of continuity. Whereas in the past, even the Enlightenment historians tried to find their own continuity, and that seems to be very important to realize. Otherwise, we write off centuries of brilliant history written by people in the 18th, 19th century.
Of course, the point is that today we do not have any asset anymore. And all these even communist historians, they deeply respected in the asset of their own world, their own education. And now we achieve a process of dismantling the asset of our civilization. So there is only emptiness, and this is the nihilism we are living in.
Absolutely, the Nietzschean reality. You, young man.
Gregor Loder from MCC too. So my question has been touched upon a little bit. So Europe, we know that Europe is built on the idea of peace. France and Germany united in the monetary union and everything else. And since then, I see that federalism has gained much and became stronger and stronger. And maybe this national identity or local identity is seen as dangerous, and maybe even a cause of war, or at least conflict between those identities and nations. And therefore, cancellation is used to create false pictures, used as weapons against these identities to keep them low. Yeah, with the essential goal to not dealing with history, and just keep the identities low and no conflict at all. Is there something in my thought?
Just behind you, the young man with the blue jacket.
Yeah, hi guys. So I wanted to ask the panel to just reflect a little bit, I guess, on the question of what ought to be done, or how we should frame our kind of contest of this new approach to history, because I think it's an understandable reaction of many of us when you see the way in which national history is demonized, to kind of want to respond to that by saying, no, people should be taught to be proud of their history. They should be taught a kind of triumphant version of their national history, and taught that if you're British history was full of successes, and if you're Hungarian history was full of success, and all the rest of it. And I just wonder or worry if that it goes back slightly too far in the other direction. I'm not sure if I want children to necessarily be proud of their achievement. They should decide that for themselves to some degree. We should teach them they are part of a country that has a particular history, and they should be taught, should we not, to put it slightly differently, should we not aspire to something more like academic rigor, rather than necessarily using history as a political kind of football or a political tool to just make people proud of their history? In other words, what should be the balance between how we teach history?
That depends on the year. I mean, primary and school children are very different than university students in terms of the history teach.
So my question is really related to the previous one. Hi, I'm Balázs Philip from also the MCC, and I was born in Romania, more specifically in Transylvania. And in my country, the history is taught, they have many theories on many aspects of the history, and if they don't know the right answer, they just pick the best one, and they teach that as a fact. Like they teach theses and options as a fact to the children, and don't describe all the options that they are possible, or they were possible in the history. So what's your opinion on this?
Anybody else would like to speak? Over there.
Thank you. I have a quick question. I'm Lazar, a master student at KU Leuven. During a recent course, we had a discussion about King Leopold II, who might be a very good example of the politicization of the history. So what they were arguing, some of my colleagues, that, let's say, the monuments of Leopold II should be dismantled. But on the other hand, I don't really get why don't we dismantle all the buildings or all the memorials that now actually fill in the budget of Belgium by the tourists. So the buildings and everything that was built during that period should then also be dismantled, and let's start from zero. So why do people think so irrationally? Okay, we want to dismantle, let's say, the monument, but the other part is okay.
Can I just, as the organizers, can we go beyond 6:30? Is there a limit? No?
Well, we can push on a couple of minutes.
All right, okay. Any other questions or points? Yeah.
My name is Frank Spengler from Germany. I see it more as a practical task. I mean, history doesn't have a lobby, and maybe even doesn't have a market. But when you look at the new media and the new possibilities you have, you can reach out to people very easily by producing a series in TV, Holocaust. At that time, I remember suddenly everybody was discussing about the Holocaust and the consequences. We will have a new film coming up from Remarque, Invest Needs Noise, nothing new in the West Front, which will hopefully get a couple of Oscars. And then the whole idea of the First World War will be on the market again. Maybe we have to address history in a new fashion to attract young people, to debate it, to see it, to work with it. Also on local level. I think when you go through small towns nowadays, you see a lot of information about old buildings, about people live there, work there. So I don't see that negatively. But it's, as you said, it doesn't have a structure. It is not used in school as it should be and so on. But in general, people are interested, but you must try to attach their sense of interest. Maybe that's the way forward.
All right, thank you. Well, what I'll do now is I'll take one more, and then I'll get the panel to, I'll give them 2 minutes. I'll give Joanne 4 minutes because it's her paper. Good. Hi.
Thank you very much, Ákos Benceget. So one observation I think that we have to do here with the lobby. So there is a clear lobbying, also mainstreaming and gender mainstreaming, but now in an LGBTQ questions, and it touches upon history, so there has to be a counter lobby. I think this is a practical question as well. And the second thing, I just wanted to add to the discussion an example. When the new Hungarian fundamental law was adopted in 2011, and there is the first part of the constitution which is remembering Hungarian history. And I think that it was criticized from outside Hungary, but not by the Hungarians, neither maybe the opposition, because what is summarized there is basically what we learned at school, like Hungarian history, with the tragedies and with the good points as well. And back then, I think in France, someone asked me, if you have a clear, strong identity, you Hungarians, why do you need to write such a text in a constitution? It's exaggerated. And I think that 10 years after, we have the answer. It's good that we wrote, because even in a decade, we could have lost the sense of our identity, because there is clear attack, and there is a clear attempt to rewrite history. And hopefully, in the Hungarian constitution, we have a short text which remembers us. I hope so forever. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So we go backwards now. Thibaut, start with you.
So to understand the why there is this constant attack against identity and history, I think that we have to consider the full picture. Europe is today a market, first of all, and the pretension of Europe is just to be the vanguard of the global market. And for market, you need an unlimited number of consumers with the same need, and you will flow the market with all your goods and services. And maybe it's not completely intentional, but this is for me the global reason, the global pattern of our Western society. We are a consumer society, and everything that will preserve singularity, that is preserve a collective consciousness, and so collective will of what we could desire against the interest of the market, against the highest net income of big companies, should be prevented. When we and about the question of what should be teaching priority, for me the most important is the feeling of the continuity. That we have a precious legacy from our ancestors, and our children will continue this legacy. And the consciousness that we are a community, and that if we do not preserve and give this legacy to our children, it will be lost forever. This is the most important, the most precious aspect, I guess, of teaching history.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Werner?
Well, first question. National identity is really, in present day thinking, deemed to be dangerous for Europe, because nation go to war, we want peace, therefore we have to exist any nationalist, including patriotic attempts, and this is one of the main points of disagreement between Hungary and the European Union. Second, what should be done? Well, first of all, read Joanne's recommendations. I guess it's 6 or 7 recommendations. All of them are well taken. Second, detect and help others to detect the advantages of nation states. Nation states are, I said it before, the only framework in which we have tested how to organize democracy. And a nation state is the prerequisite for having a social welfare state, because you need to make a distinction between those included and those not entitled to benefit from the welfare state. It's the nation state, detect it, and create the resources for running nation states with pluralistic democracies. This is what I was talking about. Next point, what else should be done? Let us try to distinguish between historical facts and historical narratives. I know there are no facts without being embedded in theory, but everybody understands that the fact that there was a Second World War is something else than a narrative, how the Second World War should be embedded in the whole of European history. We need to distinguish both of them, and we need respect for facts, and we should not be satisfied with teaching students and children only narratives, void of facts, which is another important point in your paper. Then we never should try to fix the past, overthrowing statues and dismantling buildings because they give witness of past times which you do not like. There is no chance to fix history. We only can fix historical narratives for the better or for the worse. Last point, new possibilities. Netflix is a wonderful resource. I will refer only to 3 series, very briefly. The first one is the series Rome. In the seasons of Rome, you really get the feeling that you understand what the Roman Civil War was about, which in school never happens. Never, never, never. Second, British history. The series The Crown with the different seasons. For most British, I guess, the picture of young Elizabeth will be linked to what they've seen in The Crown. So this is factual history, but of course embedded in a certain narrative, no doubt about it. If you can even have the eye-opening effect of counterfactual history. You only need to look at Bridgerton. There you see counterfactual history, which is enriching in a different way.
Thank you very much. Joe?
Thank you. Just to come back to a question from the previous round about how would we define Europe, and over here it was talked about Europe being about peace between France and Germany, and the issue of federalism was touched upon. I mean, one point I would just make in response to that is that I do think it's really vital that we separate out Europe from the EU, and I think when we talked earlier about the idea of kind of consciously engineering a perspective on history, or we've talked about year zero, or this idea of a new Europe. To me, those ideas are really emanating from the EU, which I think is very, very distinct in my mind from Europe. If I was touching upon a history of Europe, I would look at ancient Greece, at Rome, at the Renaissance, at the Enlightenment. And I think, you know, each of those 4 things, Greece, Rome, Renaissance, Enlightenment, I actually think that they're things that we can be incredibly proud of. And the idea that we can have some sense of continuity with those major and very kind of progressive movements in history, I think is no bad thing at all. And if children can grow up knowing that if children in Europe grow up knowing that is part of their cultural and historical legacy, I think that would be a really, really brilliant thing. And I personally wouldn't lose sleep over whether they were proud of that or not. You know, but rather than starting a curriculum from thinking of, you know, how can we inspire pride in children, you know, the things I'm recommending are that we start from the past, you know, and start thinking about what is it that's important about the past. Again, I would point to Greece, Rome, Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and what is it that we want children to know? What do we think about the past that is worth passing on to another generation, to the future? What do we want from the past to carry on? What's the legacy that we want future generations to be able to take forward? And like I say, I think that means that the starting point is not what are our present day concerns, but what was it that was interesting about the past. I mean, just to end on a very kind of final and flippant anecdote, You know, I grew up in Middlesbrough in the northeast of England, and this was the 1980s when kind of all around me, all the industry was closing down. You know, there was very, very high unemployment, very high rates of poverty. But the school that I went to was very close to the Captain Cook Birthplace Museum, and we knew that we had Captain Cook, and we knew that he'd kind of grown up from an impoverished little fishing village on the northeast coast and had gone on to conquer the world. And you know, we'd look at the kind of mess all around us, but kind of knowing that this great figure came from our town, it was a source of pride. But I actually think that was something really important. And the sad thing is, I think kids growing up in Middlesbrough today would get the chaos and the mess, but they wouldn't get the pride in Captain Cook. They'd be taught that he was responsible for colonialism and bad things in the world. And I think that's really sad.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for speaking. It was a great discussion. In the future, MCC Brussels is going to organize discussions on precisely the kind of questions that have been raised now of which values from the past, which experiences do we want to really make our own and really sort of fight about and discuss so that new generations understand the beauty of ancient Greece or the importance and the political insights of Rome, the Judeo-Christian tradition, all these things we want to basically discuss in an important way. I want to say just one thing. I'm not going to give you my point of view on this, but what I would suggest you all do when you go away is read one book. I know that book reading is not very fashionable, but I would suggest that you pick up a copy of Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt is a German-American political philosopher, political theorist. She's one of my big heroes of all time. And she's got a series of essays about the past. And in particular, there's an essay, one single, that's what I ask of you, one single essay called What is Tradition? You know, I fell in love with that essay, and then every time I kind of struggle with my own writings, I kind of go back to her intelligent way of looking at things. And it seems to me that we could all benefit from acquainting ourselves with the insights that she is able to bring forward there. And you don't have to be a scholar or an academic, you don't need to be a historian to really grasp the essence of Hannah Arendt, who really captures both the tragedy of Europe, but also always set enough optimism to point the way to the future. Thank you very much for coming. I'd like to hand a bit of applause for our wonderful speakers here. Thank you very much.